and welcome to a new episode from Lit Happens. Today, we are going to be doing a teacher talk episode on prepping for the preliminary exams that will be coming up in the next several weeks once this podcast episode drops. As always, my co-host is here with me, Adriel. Adriel, how are you going? We're talking all things prelim today.
All things prelim. Yeah, like you said, a few weeks for our students to prepare, and I guess this is the time of the year when a lot of the 11 kids are putting into practice some of the things they may have learned so far, the skills they would have developed for the preliminary course, and yeah, that stepping stone into the HSC.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the prelim exams are often the first time they feel like they're doing a real senior exam or test for English.
Mm,
I know that some schools might do a sort of end of year test in year 10, but very much so, this starts to make it feel real for them, right? They start to then think about trials and, like you said, HSC in the following year. So,
right.
why we thought we might cover this topic is a lot of our seniors don't know exactly how to revise for English tests, or they say, I don't really know what to
Mm,
study or what to do. So we thought, we'd offer a student kind of question and perspective on how to prepare, what to expect, and then also a kind of teacher perspective on some classroom strategies that you and I have engaged in and some other suggestions that might help teachers that are new to the prelim English course. So that's kind of
right.
the direction that we're going in for today.
Yeah, it'll be good. It'll be good to explore and unpack just how to navigate some of the complexities of a big assessment task like this for the 11 students, especially as
Mhm.
they start to venture into the whole notion of having to sit a whole paper. I think exam craft is definitely going to be something that we discuss today.
Yeah, definitely. And the more we can expose them the earlier on, the less we have to kind of spend time on when it's year 12 and we're under the pump with getting through all our content. So
Mm, mm,
let's get into it then with the student directed question here for Teacher Talks today and prepping for prelims. So often what we will hear students say when they're in term 3 of year 11 is they know they've got the exam coming up, but they'll say, how do I prepare for a prelim English exam? How do I sit an English test? What exactly am I meant to do? So I think the first thing that we often probably as teachers try to explore with them is like the point of the English prelim exam. So as an assessment task, it's examination conditions, and it's also trying to get students in the head frame of, like you said before, the format of what senior English exams look like. So even in the prelim, it'll often be separated by sections. Depending on what the school is teaching for those 3 terms, there'll
mm.
often be like an unseen section and some response writing, depending on how long the test goes for from across different schools. But there might be an essay component, there might be an imaginative component. So it's a good opportunity for students to get that unseen experience that they
Yeah,
probably don't realize they're prepping those skills in year 10, but really see it play out when they're in year 11 for sure. And obviously, we also want to kind of start mirroring these HSC style expectations as well and getting into that with them. But what would we say to them about maybe exam structure, Adriel, and what to expect and maybe see in the paper?
yeah. So, like you were just sort of suggesting and talking about there, we do have a shorter examination for students, and it is skills. So you're looking a little bit at the short answer questions. I know a lot of kids will probably look at the past papers for year 12, look at section one, and there's a lot of great booklets out there for students to practice with as well.
Mhm.
We're looking at unseen texts, a variety of them, and again, just depending on how your school is structuring it. I know the weighting does depend upon the school as well as to what your prelims
Yeah.
will be about. Most schools will probably have it at about 40% within that range, at 30 to 40%. So your
Yes.
marks may reflect that, just depending really on whereabouts you're going. But I think you mentioned there two sections. First section we've just covered short answers, and then you'll probably have some form of critical writing. So a persuasive essay is generally the go for the second section. a lot of students
Mhm.
will be like, "Oh, but how come we don't cover the creative writing at all when it comes to our exams?" And it's because you've probably already covered it in reading to write for the term one
Exactly.
assessment task,
Mhm.
and it's already been assessed as we sort of look at. So your focus then does become the prelim persuasive response, how you write an essay under exam pressure. And I think it's also a good sort of stepping stone into the HSC because 3 out of your 4 sections will have some form of persuasive essay. So, yeah, look, that's probably one of those big things. How I prepare my students is this idea of just practicing. I said, alluding to section one, we're looking at past HSC papers where they have these. Excuse me, sorry, a little bit of a cold going on at the moment, so we're
Mhm.
working
You
through things. But
one,
yeah, so,
don't worry.
yeah, but yeah, a few of these things. Excuse me, I had to mute there. But yeah, we um we do look at also the essays and having something pre-prepared, which is probably something that we'll talk about in future episodes going through. But yeah, what are some strategies you might have there, Bill?
Well, I think the year 11 is the perfect time to start hitting those HSC verbs really hard, um, because that's often what's used to guide those short answer questions and is something that the students probably touch on in year 9 and 10, but it's not really, I think different subjects hammer it a lot more. Like I know, like at our school, like HISI, like HSIE, they're very big on the HSC
Mm,
verbs. They're very explicitly teach them in that prelim so that they're ready to use them in the exam. And I think it's a good eye opener for students to see how those, for example, go work really well across subject areas. I think starting to get them to think about rote learning some of their materials.
mm,
So for your short answer, getting them to go over their big techniques, how to identify them, how to analyze the function of them. And I quite like that there's often a critical response because it
yeah,
forces students to memorize an essay and write it on the spot if that is something they haven't done before. Because,
mm,
in a lot
mm,
of schools, depending on the demographic, we might do mostly take home written tasks, or we might do in class tasks that have a component of scaffolding where they can bring something in or bring in a cheat sheet. So it's really good to get students, I think, thinking about the rote learning and the memorization of their key ideas and their key quotes so that they can apply that on the day. But really, the other thing that I try and really hone in on is the vocabulary that they will need. So, you know, whether it's subject specific or topic specific. So some schools, might be doing belonging, let's say. And so if they know that they're going to use that concept in the unseen and
mm,
in some ways part of an essay question, then you want to be, as a student thinking about going back, what was your vocabulary? Go over it, memorize it again. I think it's a good opportunity for them to realize that you can study for English. You still
yeah,
have to have notes. I don't know why, but a lot of students tend to think, oh, I don't need to write summary notes or I don't need to write key points. We
mm,
talked in last episode, Adriel, about using the tab feature
mm,
on
mm,
Google Docs. And that's where you can
yeah,
separate what's the concept, what's the rubric, summarize what is the context of your text, summarize the key ideas, summarize the
mm,
key quotes. I don't know why, and maybe because we don't do a lot of exams in junior English generally, maybe
mm,
students feel like what they would do study skills wise in other subjects doesn't apply
yeah,
in English, but it absolutely does. I think even just giving the students the heads up about that at the start of the term will make a big
yeah,
difference for their
yeah,
preparation for the exam. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that you probably just touched on there is students fail to realize the process. I mean, again, we're in
Yeah.
this sort of generation now where we're looking at just having, well, we were talking about this just off air about a few students that we know, and students just want to have that final response. Maybe good students as well. They're not necessarily, the ones that are disengaged, but even when they do get involved and they're sitting there studying, they just want the perfection from the get go. And
Mm,
it's understood because a lot of the other subjects are this is the final answer, obviously,
Yeah.
and then we look at the ways in which we sort of get to that final answer. But when we look at English, there is no final response, in terms of the subjective nature of our subjects. The answers can be varied, but the skill in getting to that varied sort of final endpoint will determine what marks students get. So we can look at, for example, a short answer question where they're doing a close reading of a unseen text in a short amount of time, whether it be a visual text, whether it be a poem, whether it be a fictive sort of extract. For students, what they identify, depending on what the question is asking, will be very different and varied. They might come across
Mm.
many different end responses. However, they all still have the capacity or potential to get that 4 to 5 mark, depending on whatever that question has been allocated. So, I guess getting students to understand that English focuses on the skill, and without you being consistent in practicing that skill, you're not going to see those final improvements. Like, you could fluke something. I always say this to the kids as well, because then often we have the response from some of our students saying, "Well, that student didn't study that hard," and they still got like a great mark. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, you could fluke something. It could be a miracle that could occur. And I don't know about you, but I would much rather be able to control a little bit more of my like where
Yeah.
my path by being consistent and being happy, because in the long run the consistency will pay off, especially
Yeah.
when it comes to things like your analytical reading, your close sort of reading, your writing in particular, in terms of your written expression. The more you practice that, the better it's going to be,
Yes.
the easier the understanding is going to be conveyed through what you have written in terms of your response. So again, I think it's what students have as a perceived endpoint is often, well, I'll study once and I'll write my things down once and I'll get to that final A response, whereas they don't see the different ways of chipping away. And I think practicing consistency, it's hard. I mean, I've got year 12 students that come on in probably term 3 of the year 12 course just before their trials. And that's when they start to realize, oh, this is what you're talking to us about, studying from the beginning of the 11 course. I said, yeah,
Mhm.
but at the end of the day, it is what it is. And it's an opportunity for students to give it a go. I think the prelims is a
Yeah.
great opportunity for students to give it a go. And again, remember the purpose of assessments in schools, and this is for students that may be listening, is, and it's a good take for teachers, is to show you where you're at.
Yeah.
I've had to realize this as well. We'll often put so much pressure on ourselves as to this is the mark that we need to get. Could be external pressures, parents, or expectations of family. Could be your own expectations. You have your internal sort of I need to be at the top, which is great. I'm not trying to diminish that by any way, shape, or form, but I just also do think that the purpose of assessments we often neglect is to show you where you're at along the
Mm.
journey. Remember, this is called the
Yeah.
prelim for a reason. It's the preliminary course. The highest
Yeah.
school certificate, when you sit that later on, it's just your high school certificate. You're not going to be continually referring back to that when you get into life, when you have to pay bills or
Yeah.
when you have to do tasks at work. So it's just to assess where you're at that moment in life. And I think when you start to shift your perspective as a student as to these big bad exams, and yes, you will feel stressed, and yes, you will feel let down or sometimes be anxious, anxiety, but there is a bigger picture at hand. I think that's probably one of those things that I've been trying to tell my students in particular is, well, if you've been consistent, that's the best you can do at the end of the day.
Mhm.
You and
Mhm.
that's gonna serve you well in the long run. I think those are some great things, that you can. So consistent in terms of your writing practice, consistent in terms of your reading, consistent in terms of the way you take your notes, consistent in terms of your understanding of the module rubric terms, consistent in terms of developing your lexicon, consistent in terms of understanding the module concepts, and implementing this into your writing. I think these are a few of the different ways in which we look at
Yeah.
these things. Consistent in terms of managing your time. I mean, that's going to be a big one. I told my students recently, they were prepping for their trials, and a similar thing applies for your prelims. Number one, and I said two rules, two big rules. I said, number one, make sure you manage your time. All right. So we generally work on the process of about 2 minutes per mark, depending on what the exam is. Okay. That's generally a nice sort of rough idea. But manage your time.
Mhm.
Make sure you are giving everything a go, and your pen should not leave the page for the entirety of the hour and a half to 2 hours that you might have,
Mhm.
depending on whatever your school has for the preliminary examination. And the
Yeah,
second thing is make sure you read the question. you know, read the question
true.
first and foremost. Sometimes you'll have questions which will be a generic question or text specific questions where you need to answer the question according to your text. This isn't necessarily the case in prelims, but you'll have to sit this later on down the track. But also, the second part of answering the question is making sure you're answering what the question is asking of you. You may have all of this great understanding of the text, a pre polished, developed response, which you need to adjust and then develop. And again, that's through that consistent drafting process. Um, but yeah, if you don't answer the question, well, you're going to be losing some, or not giving yourself enough opportunity to gain those marks that will be left on the table later on. It's probably a nicer way of looking at it. We don't sit here as
Yeah.
markers saying, "I don't like this student. We're going to take these marks away." We're we're looking to give marks, but if you leave that door open for tables to remain on the table, that's probably the way that we consider things. But yeah, that's probably how I best prepare my students. It's a consistency, work on the psychology a little bit, and if you're relaxed, it's gonna work a lot better. I know
Yeah.
as a teacher, as I've gotten older, I like golf. And then I've often spoken to you about it, but golf is a nice analogy. It's got this great sort of idea when you're on the golf course and you start to overthink things. So your next shot, it will go literally like either in the lake, it might go 2 centimeters in front of you when you go to hit the ball, because you tense up, all right, because you're just overthinking things. Whereas when you go in, you've been consistent, or you've been practicing maybe a new swing thought or whatever it may be, but you swing with a little bit of freedom, you'll feel good about your game, and the ball will generally do what it does, but the direction will still be a lot better, in terms
Mm.
of the shot that you're looking for. And then I think that's a nice way of looking at your HSC sort of exams. If you're overthinking things and you don't practice enough, there's two extremes there. What do you expect? If you don't practice, but if you do practice, but then you start to overthink things, then you just tense
Mhm.
up too much. You don't perform at your optimum level. Whereas when you do practice, when you put the work in, a little bit of consistency, but then realize that it's just a little bit of a dot or a little bit of a substation along the journey, well, then you got the freedom to swing away, and more often than not, you'll have a better game. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Anyway,
No, I
analogy.
like that. I like that. No, I like that point you made about it's really examining how they're progressing with those skills. And so if a student has been working on the reading skills, the writing skills, it's not maybe going to be too much of a shock, especially since your teacher's going to be giving you some practice questions to work with.
Mm,
If you're really genuinely trying to engage your English skills, it's a doable test. If you're just sitting back and wishing to fluke it, like you said, generally doesn't work out too well. But it's
no.
it's a good eye opener for what's to come. And I think sometimes it's a nice rude shock for kids so that they
Mm,
can get much more focused and on track when they begin the year 12 course. So it's a
yeah.
it's a nice way to see as well if you're sitting in the right English cohort course for
Mm,
English, I should say. But
mm,
moving on then
mm,
to the teacher question, Adriel. So, what would you say to classroom teachers are some of the most effective ways that they can prepare students for these exams and build their confidence? I know we spoke about, students, things that they can do in their revision, in their prep. What would you say to teachers in their day to day classroom that they can be
mm,
doing to build towards this exam
mm,
confidence and assessment?
mm. So, I mean, I've already touched on this a little bit, but you need to build principles or routines which build consistency amongst the students. So,
Mm,
I know one of the things at my school, where I'm currently working, is the like our head of department is trying to implement some fantastic sort of things at the end of each lesson, where we have like HSC style practice questions. every single
Yeah,
lesson.
cool.
And I
Consistent
think
writing, yeah.
that's right. So you're consistently just hitting the skills, different types of questions, text types, and that literally prepares your students for the trials. And
Yeah.
sometimes, in the midst of all of the content that we need to get through, it's still important to address those skills that consist like on a consistent level throughout the entirety of the term, which I think is going to be fantastic. And we've been implementing this for the last 2 years now, I think it is, and it's you can see improvements. You can see improvements. And then this is the part where we work as teachers to identify the needs for our students. And yeah, HSC style practice questions, maybe at the end of each lesson, or maybe as a silent starter to
Mm,
start your lesson. There might be some great sort of tips there. But I alluded to this in the previous about 5 minutes ago or so, where you need to develop the right psychology for your students as well. Remember, as teachers, not only are you a teacher, you are a psychologist. You work through all the different emotions that students will be facing, and you need your kids to be in the right headspace. Um, yeah, with the emotional wreck that many of them can be alongside their teachers. If we're going to be
yeah.
stressed out and helter skelter with them, we need to get this done. We need to get that done. Like, yes, that may be the case. There's a lot to always be done when it comes to
Mhm.
teaching English, and with the chaos of all the student commitments through the term, I know, like, in term 1, there were a few times where I'd see my kids once, maybe in a fortnight, so they'd miss out on 5 or 6 lessons because they just got different things on, or varied kids will be out on different commitments, and if I was to be so helter-skelter, stressed and worried about, "Oh my goodness, they haven't actually done this, that, or the other," um, that relays onto our students, that sense of panic and stress. And I think, yeah, there has to be a balance. There has to be a balance as a teacher where you are looking at obviously being that calm, cool voice in the classroom. They're looking to you guys for comfort as a teacher, but also we do need to give them the reality check at times as well. Okay, it's like if they're not putting the work in, if they're doing other things and not being intentional in their study in their own time, they just think they just need a break all the time because the other commitments take precedence. Well, that's where we give them that reality check. So being that sort of headspace doctor for them, in a way, as a teacher, is very, very important as you prepare them. And then just giving them
Mm,
opportunities to just talk with you. There's a fine balance with teachers, I would say, for us, like being an English teacher, having to look at drafts is very draining. And you don't want to be spending 7 hours in an evening having to just look at student work all the time, only for them to
yeah,
blame you afterwards and say, well, I gave you all these drafts and you said I was going to do well and I didn't do well at all. And, like these are the pressures that a lot of
yeah,
us gain. So I would say make sure, you're limiting and give yourselves opportunities to have good discussion in class, opportunities for them to share their responses in class so that when you're saying, "Hey guys, share your responses because this will be beneficial to everyone." And if you share your responses, you're the one that's getting the one-to-one feedback from your teacher. And especially when it comes to things like chunking, let's say introduction writing for persuasive responses, your short answer responses, being able to do some of those analytical, evaluative, short responses there. So yeah, those are some effective sort of routines. I say consistent routines will build consistent skill building opportunities for your students, and that will allow them not only to be fruitful in the prelim course, but also the HSC course. And there's not a one size fits all
yeah.
shoe either, guys. Like
No.
each year, you've got to look at your students. You've got to understand the capacity that your class has, and that's your role as a teacher. And then you obviously develop your routines and your plans and the skills that you're focusing on accordingly. And I think that's very, very important for all teachers because you are the
Yeah.
professional in the room. You know your students more than I do. So whatever I'm saying across these little podcast here or the screen on the YouTube channel, if you're watching, is going to be relevant because I don't know your students from a bar of soap. You're the ones that know your kids. You know how they learn, and you're going to be able to effectively develop those routines that will be most benefit for your students.
Yeah. No, that's good. And like you might have a class because like you said they're always so different year to year. You might have a class you might actually have to explicitly go through a sample exam with them. You might have to
Mm.
model a couple things with them and then you got to transfer the power back to them to give it a go. But even doing mini practice or sections
Mm,
practice, or give them a whole paper if they're seeming a bit too cocky and you want to,
mm, mm,
impart on them the realism of the situation. But I think
yeah,
ultimately, like teaching them those transferable skills, the close reading of an unseen text, and that's going to go well across multiple KLAs.
mm,
Getting
mm,
them to look at how we interpret a question we've never seen before,
yeah,
model with them how you would break it down. What are the key words? What are some synonyms? How might we approach? And also, you can provide opportunities. It doesn't always have to fall on you too. You could provide opportunities for peer feedback, or even just
mm,
sometimes I just give a checklist that's a self
mm,
reflection, and that way the student, did I convey this skill? Did I include this feature
yeah,
and this element? But it is a bit of trial and error, and it does come up really quickly, the prelim exam, because I know
mm,
a lot of schools tend to be doing the module B text in
yeah,
that term 3, I think. Yeah, and
yep,
therefore,
yep,
might include the essay for that core text as part of the prelim exam. So the
yeah,
term gets away from you, but the big thing that I think was great that you talked about was how you guys at your school are embedding it within your lessons. Like, that I'm
mm,
really big on the program, and if your program
mm,
is set up and backward mapping from the prelim exam, then you very well can cover a lot of those skills weekly or fortnightly, and therefore as a teacher you'll be feeling a lot less pressure to, oh, we got to get into exam mode now, like I
yeah,
can't talk about cortex anymore, like you said.
yep,
That's when the anxiety comes on, when you feel like, yeah, you got to cram
yeah,
everything. So, yeah, and there's no reason why you can't in every lesson include an activity for your, let's say,
mm,
module B cortex that's not going to cover a skill. Perhaps they
mm,
have to retrieve some quotes. Perhaps they have to do a bit of a short answer response. I remember working with a teacher, and every week the kids had to do a couple of 250 word responses, and they didn't
mm,
realize, but basically it was prepping them for paragraph and short answer
mm,
response writing. And I think
mm,
it's important. Sometimes we just got to go back to the basics, and will those things will really make a difference.
yeah.
Go back, different text types, get them writing, get them thinking, get them focused, and then the rest kind of becomes up to them. Hey.
Mm, mm. Yeah, no, exactly right. And then, again, what we're sort of probably echoing through our ears right now is this idea of just the consistency. The consistency is going to
Yeah.
pay off, and I think that's the big thing at the end of the day for our students. We want to develop consistent learners, not the one-off. um, Look at me, star sort of thing. So I think I'll add this final sort of things for teachers listening. I don't know if it's just because I'm a little bit older now and we've developed to this thing, but I probably had this attitude, as you would realize, even when we were teaching a while back as younger teachers.
Mm.
The students' marks, often we can feel the pressure of their marks as a reflection of our own teaching. Um, and I will say this, I mean, the students will get what they get at the end of the day. If you are trying and you are working hard as a teacher to prepare them as best you can amongst the chaos that is the modern day workplace in not only education, but I know we're speaking into this right now. The mark is not a reflection of your teaching. If you're giving it your best, you continue to chip away. Because at the end of the day, the prelims, the HSC, it's not a representation of your character, what the students get. It's part and parcel. You are directing them and you're guiding them. So you're looking at the holistic student. Okay. And then this is one of the things like nowadays I sort of look at is we prepare them as best as possible to do well. Um, and it takes a little bit of pressure off from you as well. What if my students don't all get band fives or don't all get band sixes? Like,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you've put
You
in the
can't
work, and
control. Yeah.
no, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And then that's the nature of the English course. It's such a subjective sort of course when it comes to responses, and you can do
Mm.
everything you can to best prepare your kids. And it's one of those things that if you are so worried now, again, I speak into this. I don't know what the dynamic is at every single kind of school, but I'm just saying for me personally, when I through that sort of element of having to compete continually against even my colleagues. Not that I ever had it, I don't think. Um, throw it out the door. There's so much more relaxed relaxed feel, your students feel it, and again, you are working to best prepare those students. At the end of the day, that's why we're a teacher. It's to best prep the students. It's not necessarily to best elevate your career. I don't know. It could be a sort of thing. It's just like a little sort of reference that I would say helped me out quite a bit. Is you're putting the students first, and you're trying to get them to their best sort of space, both academically and
Yeah.
as good young human beings. So I think, yeah, just that pressure that we put on ourselves as teachers, just be mindful to not let it overcome you.
Yeah,
And
I like that a lot.
yeah,
And if I could leave on that final thought, it's making sure we normalize to the students that the nerves and the anxiety that we get
mhm,
around exam times is normal,
yeah,
is common, and is
mm,
something we can work through, and really just trying to encourage healthy routines. Like, I know probably ever since
yeah,
having, my own child, I'm really big on, you got to eat well, and you got to eat XYZ, and you make sure you're getting this many
mm,
hours of sleep, and you got to support your body to do what it's got to do. And at the
yeah,
end of the day, imparting on the students, if they have tried their best and they have given it a good crack, that's all they can do, even if it's, upsetting for them,
mm,
or they didn't do as good as they've gotta learn to be that bit resilient and pick themselves up and keep
yeah,
going. But as a teacher, you're a really powerful voice to echo that and remind that in them. Maybe they did well, and the panic, now they won't panic as much next time. Maybe they didn't do so well and they needed to feel a bit more tension to perform,
yeah,
or maybe they were really stressed and they tried really hard and it still didn't go their way. And I think as teachers, we need to normalize that that could very well happen as well, but that it's going to be okay. It's all part of that
yeah,
process and
yeah,
learning curve. But yeah, prelim exam times are really exciting because I think
mm,
once they're done, the students really feel like, oh, I'm like a proper Year 12 student now. Like, this is my last year, and it's nice for them to remember that there will be a lot of fun stuff in this last year alongside all the prep and study, and it's
yeah,
nice to balance the pressure of the academia with, you're going to do a lot of fun social year group stuff, and it's a
yeah,
really nice exciting time for these students as well. Yeah.
yeah, exactly right.
All right, well, we might leave off there. Thank you as always, Adriel. Thank you as always to our listeners. If you have any other great tips or suggestions for what works in your room in terms of prelim prep, or any good stories or strategies, please feel free to share them on our socials as you start to see our content make its way towards you. But thanks again for being with us. Until next week.